June 9th, 1974. A single handshake in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. No press conference, no public announcement, no congressional vote. Just two men in a room agreeing to a deal that would govern the financial lives of every human being on Earth for the next 50 years. That deal was the Petrodollar Agreement. And on that day, America secured the most profitable financial monopoly in the history of civilization. The right to print the world's money, the right to borrow without consequence, the right to run deficits that would bankrupt any other nation on Earth, simply because the world had no choice. It needed dollars to buy oil, and it needed oil to survive. That monopoly is now over. Not weakening, not under pressure, over. And the bill for 50 years of borrowed privilege is coming due all at once. In 2023, central banks bought over 1,037 tons of gold, the second consecutive year of record buying. When the institutions managing trillions in sovereign reserves quietly start building the exits, the retail investor is always the last to know. And the last to know is always the first to lose. To understand what is being lost, you have to understand what was built. After World War II, America held 70% of the world's gold. Europe was rubble. Asia was starving. So in 1944, at Bretton Woods, 44 nations handed the United States the keys to the global financial system, every currency pegged to the dollar backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Clean. Simple. America had the gold, the factories, the military. The world had no better option. For 25 years it worked. But economist Robert Triffin saw the fatal flaw before anyone else. Standing before Congress in 1960, he delivered a warning nobody wanted to hear. For the world to grow, it needs more of the reserve currency. For the reserve currency to grow, America must run perpetual trade deficits. But those perpetual deficits will eventually destroy confidence in the currency itself. The system contains the seeds of its own destruction. Washington smiled, thanked him, and did nothing. By 1971, foreign governments held more dollars than America had, gold to back them. France was literally sailing gold back to Paris on ships. Nixon went on national television and closed the gold window. The world's reserve currency was now backed by nothing, except a promise from a government that had just changed the rules mid-game. Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh. The deal he struck was audacious. Saudi Arabia would price every barrel of oil exclusively in dollars. America would guarantee the Saudi royal family's security with military hardware and soldiers. Gulf petrodollar profits would recycle back into U.S. Treasury bonds. Because Saudi Arabia controlled OPEC, every oil producer followed. Because every nation needed oil, every nation now needed dollars, permanently, without alternative. The gold window closed, the oil window opened, and the exorbitant privilege got bigger, not smaller. At the peak of petrodollar recycling, Gulf states deposited an estimated $400 billion per year into U.S. financial institutions. That money funded Wall Street, suppressed mortgage rates for 2 decades, and financed the American consumption boom. Every time you hear about the era of cheap money, you are hearing about the petrodollar. And that era is now being dismantled by the same nations that built it. The first crack appeared in September 2000. Saddam Hussein announced Iraq would sell oil in euros instead of dollars. The financial impact was minimal. The signal was enormous. For the first time since 1974, a nation openly refused to use dollars for oil. 3 years later, the U.S. invaded Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction were found. But within weeks of U.S. forces taking control of Iraqi oil infrastructure, all Iraqi oil sales switched back to dollars. Other nations noticed. They filed it away. The second crack appeared in 2008. The global financial crisis exposed what the petrodollar had been masking for 30 years. America was not the responsible steward of the world's reserve currency. It was running a casino. When the casino collapsed, the Federal Reserve printed $3.5 trillion to reinflate the losses. The message to dollar holders worldwide was unambiguous. When American institutions gamble and lose, the world's reserve currency gets debased to cover it. China held over $2 trillion in dollar reserves at that moment. It had spent 30 years manufacturing goods for American consumers, accepting dollars and parking them in U.S. treasuries as instructed. It had just watched America quietly inflate away the purchasing power of everything China held. Beijing did not panic publicly. They began planning. In 2009, Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao publicly asked whether China's American assets were safe. Washington's answer, delivered through 3 rounds of quantitative easing, was, "We will inflate." China began buying gold the following year and has not stopped since. 18 consecutive months of central bank gold purchases and counting. Then came February 24th, 2022, the day that changed everything. When Washington froze $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, every finance minister on earth drew the same conclusion. Dollar reserves are not neutral. They are a loaded weapon pointed at your head. Washington just proved it will pull the trigger. Within weeks, the finance ministries of China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and the UAE had all internally accelerated their de-dollarization timelines. What followed moved fast. March 2023. Saudi Arabia confirms active discussions with China to accept yuan for oil. The Riad-Washington axis, the backbone of the petrodollar since 1974, is openly reconsidering its terms. Brazil and China announced bilateral trade settlement in their own currencies, removing the dollar from $150 billion in annual trade flows. France's Total Energies completes the first WAN-settled LNG trade, a G7 nation's flagship energy company publicly bypassing the petrodollar. And at the August 2023 BRICS summit in Johannesburg, 6 new members joined the bloc: Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, Argentina. The expanded coalition now controls the majority of the world's proven oil and gas reserves. For the first time in history, the nations that produce most of the world's energy are unified in a coalition explicitly building financial infrastructure independent of the dollar. This is not a protest movement. This is a construction project. Now the math, because the math is where the abstract becomes personal. The United States carries $34 trillion in national debt. It pays over $1 trillion per year in interest alone, more than the defense budget, more than Medicare, just interest. And that number is calculated at today's rates. Here is the direct connection to your financial life. When nations accumulate dollars through oil trade, they park them in U.S. Treasury bonds. That buying pressure keeps U.S. interest rates suppressed. Low Treasury yields mean low mortgage rates, cheap government borrowing. The entire architecture of American prosperity rests on foreign demand for U.S. debt. Remove that demand, and the architecture collapses floor by floor. China held $1.3 trillion in U.S. Treasuries at its peak. Today, that number is $780 billion and falling every quarter. Japan, the largest foreign holder, has begun selling to defend its own currency. The 2 largest foreign creditors of the United States are both in net selling mode simultaneously. Foreign holdings of U.S. Treasuries have declined from 34% of total debt in 2015 to under 23% today. The biggest buyers in the room are leaving, and the room still needs to sell $2 trillion in new debt every single year. Since March 2020, the Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from $4 trillion to a peak of $9 trillion. That $5 trillion did not come from nowhere. It came from the future purchasing power of every dollar in existence. The inflation you experienced from 2021 to 2024 was not bad luck. It was not supply chain disruption. It was the bill for that $5 trillion arriving at your door. And the bill for the next round is already being printed. When the foreign bid for U.S. debt weakens, Washington has 3 options. None are good. Option 1, raise rates high enough to attract buyers. This crushes housing, detonates the $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate loans coming due before 2026, and grows the debt service payment every year, requiring more borrowing, which requires higher rates, which increases debt service, which requires more borrowing. The doom loop. Option 2, the Federal Reserve prints money to buy the treasuries nobody else will purchase. This is debt monetization. It is what Weimar Germany did in 1921, what Zimbabwe did in 2008. The Fed has done versions of this 3 times since 2008, each time on a larger scale, each time with less credibility. Option 3, implicit default through inflation. Allow prices to rise faster than interest rates, so the real value of outstanding debt erodes. Your savings account pays 4.5%. Real inflation, measured honestly, runs at 6 to 7%. You lose purchasing power every single month while technically earning interest. That is implicit default, and you are already living inside it. Every reserve currency in recorded history has passed through the same 5 stages, without exception. Complacency. A dominant power earns reserve currency status through genuine productivity and strength. The privilege is real. The confidence is earned. Then the dominant power begins to believe the privilege is permanent. That belief is the seed of every collapse that follows. America entered this stage in 1944, spent 20 years genuinely earning its position, then stopped earning what it kept collecting. Excess. The dominant power spends beyond its means because it can. Why practice fiscal discipline when you can print the world's currency and export inflation? Rome debased its silver denarius to fund campaigns it could no longer afford through taxation. The British Empire borrowed against colonial revenues that were shrinking. America, from 1971 onward, printed dollars backed by oil arrangements enforced by a military, simultaneously indebting. Debt to GDP crossed 100% in 2012. It crossed 120% in 2020. It is approaching 130% today. Every percentage point above 90% is an economy consuming its own future. The Spanish Empire controlled 80% of the world's silver supply in the 16th century. So much flowed into Spain, it triggered the worst inflation in European history, lasting 150 years. Spain went bankrupt 4 times between 1557 and 1596. Controlling the world's money supply did not save Spain. It accelerated its destruction. Study Spain carefully. Warning. The signals always come before the collapse. Triffin warned Congress in 1960, ignored. De Gaulle warned the world in 1965, dismissed. The 2008 crisis warned that the debt-fueled model had hit its limit, treated with more debt. Every warning was answered with more of whatever caused the warning, more printing, more borrowing, more deferral. The warnings today are the loudest in 50 years. Central banks buying gold at record pace, foreign treasury holdings declining, BRICS expansion accelerating, Saudi Arabia opening yuan oil discussions. The signals are not subtle. Panic, the phase we are approaching, not arriving at, approaching. A reserve currency panic does not look like a stock market crash. It looks like a currency crisis, a sudden disorderly repricing as 50 years of accumulated excess gets marked to market simultaneously. The Federal Reserve faces a binary choice between hyperinflation and depression with no third option available. Reset. A new equilibrium emerges. Not cleanly, not overnight. The nations that positioned ahead of the reset capture the next cycle's privilege. The nations that held the old assets too long absorbed the losses. The reset is not a financial event. It is a standard of living event. And for the citizens of the declining power, it means the living standards deferred through decades of monetary privilege all arrive at once. The British pound lost its reserve status after World War II. Britain went to the IMF for a bailout in 1976, a former empire. The issuer of the world's reserve currency for over a century, standing in line with its handout. No nation in history has been immune to this cycle. Exceptionalism is not a financial strategy. 3 signals are flashing in the current market right now. Signal 1. The Treasury market is breaking. The 30-year U.S. Treasury bond has lost over 50% of its value from its 2020 peak. 50%. On the asset class supposed to be the safest investment on earth. The bond vigilantes, institutional investors who enforce fiscal discipline by selling government bonds when confidence breaks, are waking up after a decade of Fed-suppressed hibernation. If they move in coordination, the Fed faces a choice between hyperinflation and depression. There is no middle path. Signal 2. Dollar safe. Haven status is eroding. Every global crisis for decades sent capital flooding into dollars and treasuries. That reflex is weakening. The moment a major shock occurs and the dollar does not spike, the reserve currency premium evaporates permanently. The equity market's all-time highs are masking this deterioration. The bond market already sees it clearly. The dollar index measures the dollar against the euro, yen, and pound, currencies from other over-indebted Western nations. Measuring dollar health against the euro is like measuring your health against other patients in the cardiac ward. You might be the least sick person in the room and still be very sick. Against gold, against oil, against food, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power since 1971. That is not strength. That is managed decline. Signal 3. De-dollarization. Is accelerating nonlinearly. Network effects in monetary systems work both directions. The same mechanism that made dollar dominance self-reinforcing on the way up makes its decline self-reinforcing on the way down. Each nation that builds yuan payment infrastructure makes it cheaper for the next. Each oil trade settled outside the dollar reduces structural demand for dollar reserves globally. Each central bank gold purchase signals to every other central bank that the exit is legitimate. The process feeds on itself, and it is now past the point where any single policy intervention can reverse it. Washington can raise tariffs. It can threaten secondary sanctions. It has done both. The trajectory has not reversed. You cannot sanction your way back to monetary dominance. You can only earn it. And earning it requires fiscal discipline and genuine commitment to being a neutral steward of the global financial system. Washington has demonstrated neither in 20 years. Here is the question that nobody in Washington is willing to answer publicly. If the petrodollar finances American military spending, and American military spending enforces the petrodollar, what happens to the U.S. defense budget when the petrodollar can no longer fund it? That is not rhetorical. That is the question that determines whether the United States remains a superpower in 2035. And the answer runs directly through one small island in the South China Sea, an island producing 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, an island whose fate is now inseparable from the dollar, the yuan, and the entire global financial order. Taiwan is not just a geopolitical flashpoint. Taiwan is the detonator on the monetary bomb we just spent 16 minutes building. And that story is next.